I have an endgame position and five games to review today. Yeah, it was interesting. So basically, what I was thinking was this is an endgame position that got suggested. So the question is, White's obviously winning in this endgame situation, right? So how does White win this? How does White convert this advantage? And it's not the easiest question in the world. You can sort of basically come up with ideas for things that White should not do. White shouldn't start aggressively moving his pawns forward here, right? Because that only helps Black. So let's take a look at like a losing line here for White, or a drawing line here for White. So B4, King D7, A4, King C6, King E2, or King D2, King D5, and basically here, the main point is that White has a pretty large margin for error, but it can still potentially lose this. The biggest losses for White, I'll show you the structure that White can't allow, which is basically this. With this structure, where this one pawn is holding back two pawns, that ends up being a draw. Because in this case, Black can basically, basically force the passed pawn to become the H pawn, or the A pawn. And in this case, there's no real way to advance this. So it's mostly about efficiency. It's mostly about Black's ability to hold back two pawns with one. But other than that, this position is relatively easy to win as White. It's got it's basically a winning pawn endgame. The main point is to just make sure that the B pawn is the one that you're planning on queening, as opposed to the A pawn. With the rook pawn, Black has extra defensive resources, and White can just basically, White can challenge those. In this case, Black could play king takes b2, but by this point, the game is pretty much over because White can just advance the pawn forward, and it's a file ahead in terms of movement. But yeah, I think that the answer to this question is there's multiple ways that White can do this. It's really just about avoiding the things that, the things that make this endgame basically not work for White. The idea that the one structure that needs to be avoided for White is the one in which this black pawn blocks off the white pawn, and the kings are too far advanced, so the king can provide a defensive resource. Here, I think White may still win. King here, king here, king here, king here, king here, and White will be able to outflank the black king. So here, this should work. White will be able to come in and knock the king off of the defense of the a5 pawn. But the really dangerous situation is one in which the a5 pawn stops both the a4 pawn and the b4 pawn from advancing, and Black can maintain a lateral defense of the pawn. So king here, king here, king here, king here, king here, and this still should be a win for White. The only really dangerous things that happen for White are in situations in which basically this b pawn and a pawn are too far advanced, and the king can't keep the white king from getting into the position, or the black king can keep the white king from getting into the position. Here, this is a draw. This is an example. So here, this basically turns into a drawn situation. In this situation, White technically has the opposition, but Black can still force a win here. So here, a6, and there's a whole bunch of different kind of unnatural looking king maneuvers. But here, Black basically seizes the opposition with a6. Then White has to move. So his options are a5, in which case Black responds king to c6. And then you have that structure that we were talking about, where basically the black king is attacking basically defending the a6 pawn, and will have persistent offense on this b4 pawn. The only pawn that can advance to queen here is the a pawn. Basically, unless this king is able to get into this this black structure, which with appropriate defense Black won't be forced to allow, this isn't going to hold up for White. White's we're not going to be able to push b5, and not going to be able to advance to a6, a7, a8 pawns. But anyways, It's interesting. Thanks for thanks for joining the stream, DJ Salchicha. So yeah, the main point is keep your king in front of the pawns. That's probably the biggest kind of beginner level mistake. If you can keep your king in front of the pawns, you're going to be able to outmaneuver black's king here. You'll have extra pawns to burn tempo. The real beginner mistake in this case is moving things like a4, b4, and just making having the king be provided as a defensive resource behind the pawns. That's really the error that I think it would be the most common thing for a beginner to make. Here, you have many different routes. There's just no shortage of ways that white can win, provided that he moves the king up first. If the king's up first, the pawn is basically the pawn is gonna get attacked by white, and as long as white trades the rook pawn for the rook pawn and not the rook pawn for the knight pawn, white should be able to win this. We looked at yours yesterday mornings, DJ Salchicha. Unless you sent a new one. But there was one yesterday morning, DJ Salchicha. Anyways, looking at this situation, this is basically a custom position. In any case, white should be able to advance. The key component of this position is getting your king out in front of the pawns here. I think it's worthwhile to kind of go through a different endgame. As long as we're on to basic king and pawn endgames, I think this one's probably a good one to understand. This is probably a little bit basic, but it's a very important one if you're at about 1000 level to try to fully understand. This is kind of a classic. It's a kind of a classic lesson. I don't know if I'm sure it exists on the internet, but the important one is king space king pawn. Basically, it's this position. And how does black win this position? I should probably make it white so the colors are correct. How does white win this situation? So there's two different ways this position can go. This position can go with white to move, or it can go with black to move. If it's black to move, it's fairly easy, right? You move your king here, and then you have your 3 pawns defended here. So the king goes to d8, and then the white king goes to king f7 and defends each of the squares that this white pawn needs to advance. The other direction here is if it's white to move. This is more complicated. So if it's white to move here, the position basically becomes about determining how to basically if it's white to move. So I set it up wrong. If it's white to move, then the question is not this, how do you get these 3 pawns? Or it's basically a more complicated question on how to get these 3 pawns. So if it's white to move, then white can choose to go to either side. The king should probably match the side, but it doesn't. If the king doesn't match the side, then this king goes up a rank and defends these 3 pawns this way. If the king goes this way and the king goes this direction, then it's a little bit more complicated. White plays here, black plays here, white plays here. Black king can't go here anymore, right? Because the pawn is defending it. And then the king goes here. And then the king goes up a rank and basically, controls the 3 squares that are needed to move this queen forward. This is an interesting position. It demonstrates the value of opposition. Opposition is another concept that ties into king and pawn endgames. Basically, opposition exists if the kings are separated by an odd number of squares on the same file. So here, basically, the side that is not the one who's about to move is the one with the opposition. So here, if it's black to move, then white would have the opposition. So black moves this way, and then white can basically exploit the opposition by gaining a file by moving in the opposite direction. In the other direction, if the king goes this way, the king goes this way, the opposition can be taken with king to d7. So king space king pawn, this is considered to be a very classic lesson. I'm probably not giving it the best description that it could be given. I'm sure that it exists online. If you look at it on YouTube, you know, king space king pawn, I would be very surprised if it didn't exist. Like king and pawn versus king here. Yeah, so basically these types of lectures, chess.com appears to have one, is a good way to retrieve this. But yeah, king space king pawn is kind of the best formation for white. Anyways, it's kind of up to you know, it's basically up to white to exploit this in other types of positions. You know, here with the king far in front of the other king, or king far in front of the pawn, you can kind of do the same thing. You know, there's another trick that exists in opposition type positions. So let's assume that you know, yeah, good. Good, yeah, no, I'm happy to hear, Ahmet. I think it's basically about coming up with a good way of, you know, a good way of explaining this. But this is a lesson that exists online for free all over the place. So, you know, I thought that since people were interested in looking at king and pawn endgames, it would probably be a good idea to take a look at it. But yeah, my ideas on this are basically, you know, right. So it doesn't come up that often, and that's a very key point, Ahmet, is that endgames don't actually come up that frequently. You know, they come up more and more as your opponents become more accurate and more evenly matched, but endgames don't actually come up that often. The percentage of games that I play to an endgame is probably, I don't know, 50%, maybe less. But yeah, it should be at about the 15-minute mark, DJ Salchicha. Oh no, sorry, wait, my fault. No, sorry, my fault, DJ. I think I'm giving you the wrong information there. There was another one yesterday. I think I'm confusing you with someone else. You have a lesson during this stream, and you're the 5th game in the stream, so you'll be at about 11:15. So sorry about that. So you're number 5 in today's lecture. I gave you bad information. I was confusing you with someone else with, I think, a similar screen name. But you're in this lecture for sure. Yeah, no, sorry, my fault. I should have checked first. But yeah. Anyways, you'll be the 5th one, so that's in about an hour from now. And feel free, you know, always feel free to just watch video on demand. Like, you know, I'm happy. It's great to have you here because you can explain kind of your thinking, but. I'm never offended if you want to watch video on demand or anything like that. Like, honestly, my goal is just to make sure that chess lessons are free for everybody. So I don't want to make you know, it doesn't really matter to me whether you, you know, it's nice if you're here, but I'm not offended if you're not here because, the goal is basically just to make sure that, you know, all the lessons are free and available. That's the thought. So video on demand is always an option, DJ Salchicha. But anyways, yours is in about an hour. So yeah, anyways, okay, cool. Sounds good. But yeah, Ahmet was talking about how he'd seen this, endgame. Yeah, so this is pretty important. You know, here we've basically shown how, king space king pawn leads to a draw. But I think that if white doesn't seize the opposition here and the pawn is further up, I think if white's not careful, I think that this leads to a draw. So here, draw, right? So there's an important tactic in this situation where the pawn is not, where it's not king space, king pawn. It's the pawn separated by one further space. The situation you basically want to avoid is the one in which you basically push the king, you basically check the king. If you end up checking the king as white, you've done something wrong and will probably draw. So here, if it's white to move, it goes white here, pawn, king, and this is the drawing move that I'm talking about, e7. King there, and it's a draw. But what you can do instead in this situation is you can take the opposition. You know, here black has the opposition because it's white to move. But if you move this pawn up 1, it goes from being black having the opposition to white having the opposition. Here, black goes to one direction or the other, and then white can just move to the other side. That's an important concept. You know, basically, this concept comes up in more and more complicated king and pawn endgames, but this is the basic idea. and this is kind of a lesson that, you know, it's a lesson. So, you know, here I would basically say just consider, if you're walking away from anything in this lecture, what I would say is king space king pawn, king space king pawn is a draw regardless of whose move it is. But if you're further away, then it becomes less of it's not a win for white, and the opposition concept becomes more important. And the definition of opposition, just so everyone knows it, is when the kings are separated by an odd number of pawns, and with the kings separated by an odd number of pawns, it's when you know, the person who has the opposition is the person whose move it is not. So if it is your move and the kings are separated by an odd number of pawns, it's your opponent has the opposition. But if it's your opponent's move, then you have the opposition. This can be most important. This is probably the most basic and extreme example of how it can be demonstrated, but it's a consistent concept that you know, is important to know. You know, it's probably, you know, it's going to come up in your games probably in a more complicated way than this, but this is you know, this is a defensive resource for black. One other thing on this endgame is you know, as a general policy, okay, you can always defend king against pawn king. If the pawn is in front of the king, black can always have chances of defending this. If you know, if the king tries to move up, you move up, you move basically so that you have the opposition, and then white's forced to move and check you, which means that it's a draw. If the king's in front of the pawn here and the king goes somewhere like this, then you just move king to e7 and the king's forced back to here. Basically, you know, this is a very general way of explaining it, but it's usually a mistake in a king and pawn endgame to move your king backwards diagonally. That is almost never correct. If you need to move your king backwards in a king and pawn endgame, move your king backwards on the same file. Here, king over, pawn up, king there, draw. King backwards, and you have the opposite. You have a problem because king there, east d7, and there's no check from white. With no check from white, black king is forced to go from the d8 file to the c7 square. And white can take the three pieces, or the three squares needed for promotion here. So anyways, this is a pretty basic pawn endgame. I'm sort of considering, you know, putting a lot of these together. You know, honestly, at this point, you could very easily put together like you know, a full curriculum. So yeah. Anyways, this is an example of a rough lesson on a king and pawn endgame. But all of this stuff, you know, is not too complicated, and you know, could be distributed for free online, is my point. Anyways, interesting game. Thank you very much for suggesting the king and pawn endgame. The initial king and pawn endgame, just so you know, was this, with the kings opposing each other, and white having an extra pawn. This is going to be a win for white no matter what, and the main theme is to bring the king into the game before the pawns get brought into the game. Make sure to advance your king in front of your pawns in a king and pawn endgame. That's the key idea there. Anyways, I think it's pretty interesting. I was going to move on to the next game. This is Julio's game. Let's take a look. Okay, Julio is playing white here. And cool. Okay, so Julio switched over to e4. I think this is interesting. You know, I think basically, you know, this provides a pretty interesting, you know, general situation. I would say that the exchange Caro-Kann is not particularly strong. The issue with your game was the last game last night, Matt Yop. It was in the last part of last night's stream. But yeah, thanks for asking, Matt Yop, and thanks for sending the game. It's the last one in last night's stream, so it should be available video on demand right now. But let me, yeah, no, let me know. So anyways, hey, thank you very much for the follow, mate, and thank you very much for the follow, Sam Sejuani. I appreciate it. Thank you guys both for joining the stream. Thanks. But yeah, so you know, c4, knight at f6, knight c3, knight c6, And basically here, white can just, white can basically just play standard moves. So basically with pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, white still has the advantage, and white plays the Panov here. Panov is defined as the exchange Caro-Kann with an early c4. This has some similarities to the Monte Carlo variation of the, Monte Carlo variation of the French exchange, where basically there's an exchange of the e pawns by white and then c4 is played. It's pretty similar. I think the Monte Carlo tends to be a little bit stronger than the Panov, but I think white basically here has the opportunity to, make kind of some aggressive play, basically make some kind of aggressive plays. The one disadvantage of this exchange Caro-Kann versus the regular Caro-Kann is that the knight gets to go to c6 here. So with knight c, basically c4, the immediate, black comes up with an immediate response, but after a few moves, black will get to play knight to c6. In a normal c6 structure, basically, in a normal c6 structure, the c6 natural developing square for black is blocked. Here it's not blocked, so black can just develop the knight to the most natural developing square. Anyways, this this ends up being pretty good for white. Bishop to e4, f3, knight takes, pawn takes. And basically, this has equalized for black. We can slow it down a little bit and see kind of where the initiative got shifted. But the exchange Caro-Kann, I do think Panov is the best way to play the exchange Caro-Kann. But the exchange Caro-Kann fixes a key problem in black's position, which is the inability to develop this knight to c6. Anyways, pawn takes, c4, knight c3, knight to c6, bishop to e3. And white's looking fine. I think c takes d5 is probably the best idea. C takes, knight takes, queen takes. Here I think white can play moves like knight to f3 and have relatively natural development. The queen's not going to come along this diagonal. If e6 is played, you can play a3. But I don't know. Panov is interesting. It's a good way to give your, booked up Caro-Kann opponent a challenge that involves a relatively open position. Yeah, so I guess I would just say, knight f3 is probably better than bishop to e3 here. They both defend the e4 pawn. But fundamentally, they're both fine. As long as you keep the development going, I think there's no real problem here. But the issue is this knight is now developed much more naturally than in a normal Caro-Kann game. So here, queen takes c1, knight to d3, king takes, and white's looking fine. I think this ends up being I mean, I don't know. I guess it's interesting. Like what I would say in terms of this opening is, you're basically giving black equality. The Panov is not as good as the French Exchange Monte Carlo variation, and the French Exchange Monte Carlo variation is already a drawish opening. It's up to you, but these types of openings, which give your opponent early opportunities at equality, are kind of shaky. I think that they're not really, it's not that white is doing much wrong here. White is basically coming up with ideas to, develop quickly and naturally. And there's that's a fine idea. There's no problem there. But the issue is that the black has already equalized. As white, your goal is to get and secure an initiative. If you're just equalizing as white, then I don't know. It's kind of not it's not that strong. So it's not that these edges for black look particularly unreasonable. If you look at this type of situation, like g6, bishop f5 here, you're fine. You're basically developing pieces. You're roughly at the same stage in development, but you're not ahead in development, or you're not ahead in position. Trading off, basically what ends up happening in the in the Caro-Kann Panov attack is you've traded, or any exchange Caro-Kann, is you've traded off the e4 pawn for the c6 pawn, right? So if you trade these pawns off against each other, then you're basically going to end up in a situation where, if you trade these pawns off against each other, then, that's not a good trade, right? I mean, in any other situation, if you were to evaluate the value of the e4 pawn or the c6 pawn, you would say that the e4 pawn is worth a lot more, right? So if the e4 pawn is there and gets traded for the c6 pawn, and you remove both of those from the board, that would be a bad trade for white, right? And yet that's what happens in this opening. So I don't know. I think generally this trade is bad. If you look at this trade, it trades this e4 pawn for this c6 pawn. That's not a good trade of pawns. This pawn is providing much more for white than this pawn is providing for black. And if you trade those two off, then that ends up being a questionable trade that equalizes. Now you've got equality. I mean, equality is not the worst thing in the world, but like in this game, but like it's it's more for white to kind of overcome. White's supposed to have a built-in advantage in this game, and if it ends up being an equal position into the middle game, then things are more complicated. All right, let's slow down and let's look at this position. Here, I guess what I would say is that this position ends up being, this position basically ends up being, I don't know, equal, slightly better for white. Where are the strategic points here? I guess I would say bishop to b5, pinning this knight to this rook makes sense. Bishop to b3 is fine. Queen to d3 is fine. But yeah, bishop to b3 I think is probably the best play. I don't know. Or actually, the engine says you can push d5 already. Bishop b3 looks reasonable to me. This basically will take this bishop off of the attacking rank. So if you play bishop to b3 and the knight goes to a5, you can play knight to e2, and you can play, and if knight takes b3, then queen takes b3, and your rook is challenging the rook on c8. So I don't know. It's about an equal position. Okay. I don't know. I mean, it's sort of tricky. It's tough. Like, white has this isolated queen's pawn, but so, in an isolated queen's pawn game, white will generally have good attacking chances with his bishop, but there's not really much of the way in terms of points of attack. I don't know. I guess it's just sort of drawish because the queens, there's not really much many pieces in the middle. Bishop takes d5 is possible, right? Knight to c4 potentially. I sort of like knight to c4, and the reason why I like knight to I like knight to c4 here, that maybe there's a tactical break here. So yeah, okay, knight e3 is a problem. Knight e3 needs to be defended against. As a general theme, though, I like knight to c4 because I like the ability of white to trade this bishop for that knight. You're trading off the better minor piece for the worse minor piece, but at the same time, if you're making the pawn structure symmetrical again, I think that will be better for white. But let's just keep looking. A3, rook takes, queen takes, sure. And here things are starting to get so. Let's just think about basically I don't feel like white made much in the way of errors in this game. We'll take a look at like the eval, but like I don't think white really did much like wrong here. I think it was basically an issue with playing into an opening where the you were giving black equality almost immediately. Like if you look at this game, basically up until 20 moves the thing is almost completely even. I don't think this is bad. I just think that it's, white should be shooting for more than, a plus 0.27 maximum advantage in the game. So, yeah, this trading the e4 pawn for the c6 pawn, I think it's understandable why that's not a good trade of pawns. The development all seems correct. Like, this all seems like the correct play for white. And All right, welcome back, Matt. Yep. I hope that analysis was all right. Um, yeah, yeah, no problem. No, I hope it was helpful. Um, so yeah, here I guess I would say uh, there's problems with I don't know. I mean, there's problems with the way that this queen has an advantage here. Uh, Khan, I like the main line. Main line is my preference. Definitely not the exchange. Um, yeah, you make a good point, Matt Yop. With the Nimzowitsch, I transpose it into the Italian game, or try to transpose it into the Italian game. If you just play knight f3 against the Nimzowitsch, your opponent plays e5 a good percentage of the time. They might play knight f6, but yeah, I like to transpose that into the Italian game. That seems to work pretty well for me, Matt Yop. Anyways, in terms of I don't know, in terms of like game here, you're basically so I like mainline. I'll show you the Caro-Kann that I play. I've played through this before on the stream, but basically the mainline Caro-Kann is knight c3, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, h4, h6, and then knight f3, knight d7, h5, bishop h7, bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, and queen takes d3 on the 10th move. Is d4 fine versus the Nimzowitsch? Yeah, it is. It's actually fine, in the sense that it's actually good against the Nimzowitsch, because against the d4 against the Nimzowitsch, you basically run into d5 a lot. So if you play knight f3, e4, knight c6, knight f3, d4. Black often plays d5, and then black is lacking the critical resource of c5 or c6. Like the knight is blocking the pawn on the c file. So the best that black can do in that situation is play the Queen's Gambit Orthodox, which is generally not very good for black, or it's not very. It has limited winning chances for black. So yeah, you can definitely play d4 there too. I play e4, but you can play d4. Sure, yeah, it's up to you, Matt. Yep. You can send in whatever you like. So yeah, whatever works. Yeah, there's some traps in d4. There's some traps in the Alekines too. We could quickly go through those at some point, but hey, thank you very much for the follow, S77. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining. But yeah, sure, Matt Yop. I'll add that to my list of games. That should be on May 26th or May 22nd at 9:35. Interesting. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know there are that many gambits where the bot plays the elephant gambit. That's interesting. But anyways, here this is trading the e4 pawn for the c6 pawn. That seems good for white. Knight takes, pawn takes. White's just fine. Basically, white's playing an intuitive way in an equalized position. I don't know if his chances are that good. White's pawn structure is a little bit worse, but he has the better minor piece. Here I would probably play knight takes d5. I think if you can equalize this pawn structure, that tends to be good for white. I recognize that's a little bit weird because, here you're facing off this d4 pawn against this e5, e6 pawn, which has a favorable opposition. But I think you should trade off the knights here and fracture black's pawn structure. Now white has the better pawn structure. Before, white has 3 pawn islands, black has 2, so it's a better pawn structure for black. But here you actually have, both sides have 3 pawn islands, and white's pawn structure is better on the king side. So this ends up being better for white. So I would trade off the knight here. I think knight takes d5 is definitely better than knight to d4. And then it's sort of, not in a particularly aggressive way, but the game does sort of shift a bit. Rook to c8, rook to c1, sure. Bishop f6, queen to d3, knight to e7. And here I think white's looking, fine. I don't think there's much, basically, or I think black's looking fine, sorry. White just doesn't have, white's never been able to successfully launch an attack in this game. Black's probably just going to trade off the pieces and, potentially draw. The king safety is a little bit poor here. Here the engine is advocating aggressive attacks for black on the king side, but I don't know. Queen d1, sure. Overall here, I think black ends up in a pretty good position. Yeah, mate. All right, interesting. So this game was weird. It was a fairly open game. It went from basically equality to a win for black. I'll show you a few places where I think white could have improved, but overall, I guess I'm just not sold on Caro-Kann Exchange. Caro-Kann Exchange seems to be a tool to equalize. It might be good as a surprise attacker against someone who's super prepared to play the Caro-Kann, but still should be worse. I don't know. Knight takes d5, pawn takes knight takes d5, pawn takes d5 is better than knight to d4 here. Basically this fractures black's pawn structure. Otherwise, the pawn structure is not going to be particularly, basically black's going to have a better pawn structure unless white takes the opportunities to disrupt it. So knight takes d5 is better than knight to e4. Other than that, a3 makes sense. I don't know. It seems pretty intuitive. And yeah, really just not that much. There just wasn't the great play for white in this game. White was never able to form kind of a cohesive attack. Opportunities to form a cohesive attack for white, probably, Caro-Kann Exchange might not have well-established attacks as well as some of the other openings do. I would probably play queen to b3 here. Queen to b3 seems to put a lot of pressure on black. I think that, okay, so knight a5 is the response. But yeah, I think queen a4 at least kind of sets up a general way of attacking. Bishop d7, sure. I don't know, potentially I'm thinking queen b4 probably isn't playable. Anyways, yeah, the biggest error that I see really for white is, d5 is considered to be better here. The engine is suggesting immediately challenging with d5. It's largely for the reason that they're trying to equalize your pawn structures. So here you're basically trading off your isolated queen's pawn, which is an isolated pawn, for black's e6 pawn. You end up sort of doing it the same way with knight takes d5, pawn takes d5. Here you end up with the symmetrical pawn structure, so this is an improvement for white. And then in terms of evaluating where this turned from an equal game to a game where white was down 3 pawns, a3 makes sense. I guess here queen to d2 is better. The reason why queen to d2 is better than rook to c1 is because rook to c1 loses the c file. So here, basically, knight plays to d3, and the rook will eventually get back to c8. But if you play queen to d2 instead on this trade, so instead of a3, queen to d2, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, now the rook gets access to the c file, and no corrections will have to be made in terms of getting the rook to the c file. If you play a3 instead, this trade, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, and then knight to d3. First, this is a tactic that wins this bishop for that knight, so an improvement in the minor piece. But second, it allows, basically either forces black to disrupt his king side with king takes f2, or, basically abandon the control of the c file with queen takes d2. Or rook takes d2, but then having no rooks or queens on the first rank is sort of awkward. So knight to c5, rook to c8, rook to c1. Overall, I think black's just better. Black wins this pawn on b2, and that's actually really important. Here now, black is up a pawn, and white still has no real, items for attack. This knight is posted in a reasonably okay way, but like the b6 is going to be able to be played, and then the knight is going to move to like d3 probably. But yeah, I mean, I think white's just kind of in a difficult situation. So the lack of a formal plan was a big problem for white in this game, I think. I think there were tactical opportunities for white to disrupt black's pawn structure or to make symmetrical the pawn structure. I think those were worthwhile. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, and d4, d5. This should work. But yeah, I think forfeiting the c file to white was a problem. But interesting. Oh, that's cool. That's cool, Pervilo. Yeah, 1500 is pretty solid. Yeah, a lot of people play chess. But anyways, I think this is basically kind of inefficient for black. This you know, or sorry, this is rough for white. There's just not much in the way of opportunities for white to attack here. Best ideas that I saw were things that included like trading off. So I sort of like this line. This starts to expand on the queen side, but this, this trade of the d4 pawn versus the d5 pawn, making the pawn structure symmetrical, that's the main benefit. I just think that c takes d5. I mean, you can read a bit about the exchange Caro-Kann, but I bet that, like, let's see, Wikipedia exchange Caro-Kann. I'm gonna guess that this Wikipedia exchange Caro-Kann is gonna be kind of panned here. This line is considered to offer equal chances. I mean, it's equalizing. I don't know if that's, I don't really know what to think on there, but I think you should shoot for an opening that promises more than equality for white. And coming up with a formal plan out of the exchange Caro-Kann wasn't particularly easy either. Black seems to get natural development with knight to c6, which is normally a blocked off Caro-Kann square. So my best advice in this game was focus on the pawn structures and try to make the pawn structures equal. And then, if you have this open file, try to retain, work hard to try to retain this open file. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, queen to d2. You should be able to move your rook to the c file and win over there. So, anyways, that's my thinking on that. And I think after, I think basically at this point, white's showing reasonable chances, but it still looks extremely drawish to me, to be honest. So, I don't know. Overall, interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it. Julio. Exchange Caro-Kann is tricky. I don't know exactly what to do, in that opening as white. I'm guessing that it's going to be fairly drawish, but, it still may offer you winning chances. My main idea is, make the pawn structure symmetrical, and maximize mobility for your pieces and try to come up with a cohesive plan, but I couldn't really come up with one on the fly, so that may be difficult in that opening. If there are specific theories, I would take a look at like Bobby Fischer's openings for that, for how to play the exchange Caro-Kann. He might have assembled some plans there, but yeah, I don't know any, to be completely honest, I don't know how strategically to do that. The e4 pawn trading off against the c6 pawn is kind of questionable. So anyways, that's kind of what I'd assess. All right, so there's this bishop c4 move. This Sicilian defense is, I think, questionable. E4 c5, bishop to c4. Bishop to c4 runs into e6 in the Sicilian if it's played this early. I don't think it's a particularly strong opening. I think if you play e6, you're going to close this diagonal, and then this bishop's going to be on a misplaced diagonal. So that's my recommendation, e6 after this and against this. You play e6 eventually. I guess you're sort of making a good point with e6 played now. Like, I guess it doesn't really matter when e6 is played because it's going to lead to the same misplacement of this bishop no matter when. So a delayed e6 might also be fine here. Okay, black hangs his knight on g5. Knight d4, sure. The rook gets hung, doesn't it? Rook to d5. So yeah, as always, basically Subhan, I think your best route forward is to use the tactics trainers that are in my chess resources section of my Discord. Whichever tactics trainer you want is fine, but it's really going to help you a lot because tactics come up left and right in this game. If you look at the ridges in this game, like there's a lot of volatility. I think being able to capitalize on this, or if basically there's a swing from -4 to 8, and then there's a swing from 8 to -5. So between those two, I think you should be able to, kind of come up. You should be able to capitalize on that. So my recommendation is, do the tactics trainer for an hour or two a day for a couple months, and you'll be able to capitalize much more if the game's, basically avoid the error that swings the game 13 points, and then make sure that the line stays, 6 points in your favor. That's my recommendation. I think in terms of playing e6, I would have done it immediately, but your delayed playing e6 worked out fine. There's no problems with this. And then just as this game goes on, the bishop becomes more and more misplaced. Your opponent hangs a piece. Good job, finding the tactic that finds the hanging piece. Overall here, yeah, I think Black's going to end up in a pretty good, Black's going to end up in a good position up material. What happened to Black's second piece? So c6. All right. So this is a tactical mishap here. You're getting threatened on d4 by c3, right? But the issue with taking knight here is here pawn takes and white's up a piece. Queen takes knight and black's equalized in terms of pieces, and then white takes knight here, and then white has won a piece in this exchange. So overall, this loses back a piece for black. I just think these are very tactical. These are very focused tactical combinations. I don't think there's much in the way of. I don't know. I mean, I guess I would say I just don't think there's much in the way of like improvement there from a strategic perspective. You hang the queen here, and yeah, this is just rough. I mean, I don't really know in terms of I don't really know in terms of what you should do. Like e6 blocks off this bishop, right? This bishop's attack on f7. That's a good idea. But if you're, if you're hanging this many pieces, the answer is tactics. This game has a lot of tactical inefficiency, which is completely fine. And everyone plays chess at a level at some point where they have games with a lot of tactical inefficiency. What I would say is make sure that you fix it. I mean, it's the next step in your game. Next step in your game is being able to play, in a complicated tactical position very accurately. With that, you should be able to, really comfortably win. When black hangs a piece here, or when white hangs a piece here to queen takes g5, black is up by a lot So your principle here should be play in a tactically stable way, trade off pieces if you can because you're up a piece, and head to an endgame up a piece. That's the best strategy here, and if you do that, you're going to be in good shape as black. So tactics training is what I'd recommend. I'll pull one up. Chess.com. Chess.com puzzle battle is great. So chess.com puzzle battle, how I think you get a few free games of chess.com puzzle battle a day. Just play it a couple times, see if you like it, and then if it doesn't work, then you can do chess tempo or any other free tactics trainer. But that's my recommendation, and that I think will move you forward. This is the tool that I use now for tactics training, but whatever tactics trainer you use, it'll be one that will work. So overall, thanks for sending the game, Subhan. I don't have too much. It's really just tactics, and when it's a tactical game, I can't do any better than read off what the engine is saying. I don't think no one can play tactics as well as the engine can. So you know, I'm in a tactical game. I'm basically stuck kind of reading off what's on the engine output. I wouldn't want to pretend like I'm doing any better than that because the engine is really the one who's solving this position. But what you need to do, or what you would be best off doing going forward, is going to a tactics trainer and really studying tactics, because all of the tactical opportunities and chances in this game, you would have a better chance of capitalizing on with enough tactical study. So, yeah, chess puzzles survival, unlimited times, cool. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm in favor of that. I like timed puzzles better myself. I think a mix is probably good. I don't know if Lichess has like a puzzle rush or puzzle battle type idea, but I like those a lot better. I think doing both of them is probably your best idea. Anyways, interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, Subhan. Got very tactical very early, so with that having happened, study tactics. Thank you very much for sending it. So yeah, no, I agree. I think that the free resources on Lichess are great. I have some type of I basically have some bias towards chess.com. I am lucky enough that I have membership on it. But yeah, okay, Puzzle Racer. I don't know these ones. I should learn. I should learn Lichess's suite. But whatever works is the most important thing. The Lichess tactics trainers are a good way to go about things too. I'm not preferential to the chess.com. It's just what I use. Okay. All right. So this is Pravila's game. Cool. Let's take a look. French with knight c3. I don't know this super well. Queen's knight variation of the French defense. Okay. If you look at this, knight c3 is played less than 1% of the time. In terms of eval, I think it's probably fine. Yeah, so it's fine. d5, I'm guessing, is correct. Looks correct. Here, I guess, the most common thing to do in this situation, actually, is to transpose this into the Sicilian. It's kind of interesting. It basically transposes into a closed Sicilian if you play c5. What you play d5, I'm sure, is also completely fine. d4, and now you're in the mainline French. Yeah, no problem. No. Thanks for sending it, Pravila. But yeah, this is now a mainline French. With d3, so that would be on d4. You played d5 and then d3. d3 is an unusual move. This is sort of transposing it into like the King's Indian attack. That's interesting. Here. Yeah, c5 probably makes the most sense. c5 controls the center. Since white wasn't interested in controlling the d4 pawn, or d4 square, black can make a good play for the d4 square with c5. Other opportunities, c5, knight f6. Knight f6 makes sense, advancing development. So yeah, so I guess I would make a suggestion here. I would say that moving the same pawn twice in this opening is probably not so great for black. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's sort of with this knight, or with this pawn moved to d4, you do displace this knight, but the knight has plenty of places where it can go. So on d4, knight e2 is probably just fine. I'm curious about knight f. Why is knight f3 getting suggested? Weird. But yeah, knight e2 is better for white. Interesting. Yeah, Sicilian is yeah, I mean, I would go with development here, though. I think advancing this pawn a second. Your pawns in the early opening are generally not that good on the fifth rank. I would play something like knight to f6 here. Knight to f6, and black's doing fine. That's my recommendation. So knight f6 over d5. And yeah, I feel like black's doing fine. This, yeah, no problem, Subban. We actually just went over your game. I think the biggest component of your game was tactics, Subban. I think tactics training. I know I say that to everyone, but um, I think tactics training is your best route forward, Subban. Go to a tactics trainer that you like, whichever one you like the most, and just play on it for like an hour to 2 hours a day for a couple months. It'll really help your game. But yeah, thank you for sending the game, Subban. It was an interesting one. And yeah, you're in pretty good shape after queen takes g4, and you definitely want those those advantages to hold for you. So thanks for sending it, Subban. Please keep sending them. But the biggest general concept is go to a tactics trainer and do it for like a couple hours a day for a while. That's my best advice, and I think it'll help you the most relative to anything else. Okay, so here, black basically has a big center. Black's looking a little bit underdeveloped, but this big center makes sense. Yeah, they should be attached to this play. Well, this on Twitch, there's 14 days of the most recent video on demand, and then I'm currently trying to figure out another solution, but I also have a YouTube channel where the videos are up for forever. But yeah, the last 14 days are all on Twitch, and yeah, feel free to watch on Twitch. Feel free to watch as much, basically whenever it's convenient for you. So yeah, good question, Will. But yeah, all videos, all these lessons are saved for all time on the internet somewhere. Last 14 days on Twitch, and then forever on YouTube. All right, so black's looking fine here. And then this is a big decisive error. So interesting game, Pervilo. Interesting. What I want to say about so Pervilo, I think you're already studying and doing lots of chess puzzles. I think that's great. I think it's really going to help you out, and I think that basically doing as many chess puzzles as you do, Pervilo, is a great idea, and it'll lead to good good improvement. So keep up with that. That's your top priority. In this game, both pieces hung their queen at various points. That happens. This is, people, one move errors happen all the time. They happen to people of all levels. But I think that the best route to kind of fixing those to the best you can is just do more and more tactics. Doing lots of tactics, particularly quicker time control tactics, is going to lead you to a place where you're playing more carefully. It's you have a full 10 minutes here, right? So like in this situation where you hung your queen, you still had 8 minutes to go. So I think there's a lot of value in being very careful. These types of games, you're up a queen now, and you have an eval advantage of almost 9. So you really just want to make sure that you don't make any kind of fatal errors here. When you move the queen to the rook file attacked by the rook, that's an error, and that swings the game, 13, 14 points. Interesting. That's actually really good. No, thank you for sort of explaining your thought process, Pravilo. Like, I think it's this is just a one move error, and it's very likely to be decisive because you're losing 13 points on the eval. What I would say is, I think that do a lot of tactics. Maybe Puzzle Racer. I guess if that's the I don't know what that is, to be honest, but if that's the free alternative to chess.com Puzzle Battle or chess.com Puzzle Rush, I think the quicker tactics trainers may be helpful in fixing this problem specifically. I think there's a lot in terms of the quicker tactics trainers, in terms of 1 and 2 move threats. Your goal is just to have 1 and 2 move threats memorized to the point where your pattern recognition is like almost perfect. You can basically remove these types of one move errors from your game. Um, uh, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, wait, so you're playing Sicilian as black, but with white. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to do in the Sicilian, Sam Serjwani. The book Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine gives a very good description of what to do in the Sicilian, and that's basically what you do in the Sicilian. In the Sicilian, you attack aggressively on the king side as white, and basically expand and pawn storm on the queen side as black. That's how you play that game. So yeah, you're playing the theoretically right concept there, Sam Sejuani. In the Sicilian, attack aggressively on the king side as white. Sounds like what you're doing. But yeah, like G4, H4 type moves, pawn storming on the king side. That's how to play that opening, Sam Sejuani. So that's correct. I stick with that general strategy. Feel free to send in a game and I can take a look at it. But that's the general strategy. The rest comes down to how well that strategy can be executed. So yeah, queen to a4 is an error. But my advice here is just study those puzzles and study the simple puzzles. Like not even like the hard, like complicated ones. Go for like the quick timed 1 or 2 move tactic ones. If you do enough of those, I think you'll become much better at seeing, why queen a4 is hanging. It will improve your focus. No, thanks, Pravila. No, thank you very much for sending the game. It's really good. It's really good. I feel like you're definitely improving, and I think 1 and 2 move tactics training, like speed chess tactics training, will help with this specific issue. I think the tactics training that you already do, Pravilo, is great. I think keep at it. I feel like it seems like you've gained some points since you started sending me these games. So, but yeah, just keep at the tactics training and maybe do quicker tactics training too. I know that might be kind of challenging, but but I think that's how you would correct this type of error in a rated game the best. But it's a great game, Pravilo. Thank you very much for sending it in, and send in as many as you like. Like I'm super happy to look over these. I think the concepts in this one were fine. I might have developed instead of played d4, but this is fine. From this position, you've equalized. Basically, if you've equalized as black, you've achieved kind of your first objective. So overall, I really like black's position at this point, and I really like black's position after you win the white queen. But those one move errors, unfortunately, are enough to swing the game against you pretty quickly. So that's just sort of my thinking there. Tactics trainers, speed chess tactics trainers, that will be your best way forward. And yeah, great stuff, Pravila. Thank you very much for sending it. Please keep sending them. And I think with some tactics training, you'll really be in good shape. Good job also playing this one out till mate. You got the draw. Nice. Yeah. Good job, Pravila. Thanks for sending the game. Please send more. All right. Thank you for waiting, DJ Salchicha. Here's your game. DJ Salchicha, you are playing white, and let's go over this. So you play the London system. I really like the London system, to be honest. I think it's a great opening to play at relatively low rated level. It's just very solid. It doesn't create any problems for white, and it's kind of simple and strong to play. Like it's just not too much of a challenge. You can play quick developing moves like knight f3, e3, bishop d3. Overall, I think it's a good plan. Not much in the way of errors that you can make super easily. Queen f6 seems like an uncomfortable move to play here. Yeah, send in as many as you want, Matt Yap. Matt Yap, the best way to send them to me is probably on the chess.com or on the Discord. I don't know if you guys have the Discord link, but yeah. Would you be cool just recopying it on there, Matt Yap? And then I can put it on my I can put it on the schedule. But I put the one, yeah, if you just send it to me in the game submission section for the Discord, Matt Yop, that's the best way to go. Just because, if you send me a game, I'll put it like put it like in the list, but the best way for me to stay organized is if you put it on the thing. Uh, yeah, two knight c6 versus London. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I agree with you, Sam Sejwani. I think you're pointing towards a really key fundamental point there. Basically, bishop c4. So knight c6 I know is a relatively common move here, but one of the things about queen's pawn openings, which London system is that often the c pawn is important. It's either important to challenge white center on c5 or it's important to defend black center on c6. So I completely agree. I think knight c6 in general in queen's pawn openings creates a major problem on c7. Sometimes you can fix that, and sometimes you can play queen's gambit orthodox, and basically things will be okay. But yeah, you're absolutely right about knight to c6 as black against the London. With knight c6 as black against the London, you're holding in the c7 pawn, and that's a problem. You see, awesome. Thank you, Matt Yop. It'll be in probably for May 23rd, so 2 days from now. Probably during this morning session 2 days from now, Matt Yop. Thanks for sending it. Feel free to send it as many as you like. It's all, feel free to send whatever games, however many, whatever. It's super helpful. I get to plan in advance if I get more games in advance. But yeah, so knight to c6 blocks in the c pawn. So for that reason, c4 is often played first by white in the queen's gambit, and similar c pawn moves challenging or defending the d pawn are a common theme that black loses out on if he plays knight to c6. Here I think white's looking fine. This hangs the bishop. This hangs the c7 pawn. So this was an opportunity for you, DJ. Really gotta, as best you can, keep an eye out for these, these hanging pawns and that kind of thing. So yeah, bishop takes c7 is good. Bishop to d3 makes sense from a fundamental perspective. Like, you're developing your piece, you're challenging black's bishop. That makes sense. Wow, that's great. Yeah, no, good stuff, Matt Yop. Keep at it. If you just keep doing them, you're gonna improve more and more. I really think it'll help. A lot of people sort of overlook tactics in their training, but if you play a lot of tactical games, or play a lot of tactical puzzles, I think it'll really help you improve quickly. Yeah, thanks for joining the stream, Matt Yop. I'm glad it was helpful. So yeah, here queen to f6, sure. But bishop takes c7. c7 is just hanging, so you can just take it. This is an opportunity, basically, pawns do get hung in the opening, so it's important to, remain alert and be ready to play moves like bishop takes c7 if you can. Continuing on this, cool, c4. Pawn takes. This all looks fine for white. Cool. Yeah, thanks, Sam Sujwani. I added one for you earlier this morning. I don't know if that's the same game, but yeah, whatever you guys send is going to get added to the stream eventually. So within a couple days. So yeah, feel free to keep sending as many as you like. We'll review them here. But yeah, so knight c6 creates problems in the London system because black can't play c6 or c5 anymore. White sets up the reverse side of the semi-Slav. I think this is pretty solid. Bishop takes c7 is a missed opportunity, so that's the first thing. Bishop takes c7 just works here, so that's the best. And then in terms of more things for white, all of this looks pretty reasonable to me. c5 is actually very interesting. That's what the engine's recommending, and I like it. Like, I think c5 basically really restricts this rook's mobility. If you play c5, this rook can never really get back into the game. It's going to be stuck somewhere over on the queen side away from everything for the rest of the game. So, so c5 I think is valuable. And okay, cool. Yeah, no problem, Sam Sirjwani. Thank you very much for adding it, and we will I'll add it to the stream as soon as this one's over. But yeah, c5 holding back this rook. That's good. And rook takes. Overall, I just think white is fine. Rook c5 though is an error. Okay, so this is a problem. b6 forks the rook and the queen here, and that's more material than white can give up. So yeah, b6 here is an improvement. So yeah, I would say b6 over anything else. And yeah, then you get a good mate. So in terms of improvements here, there's really only two, and I think they're both tactical. I think that the first is this pawn was hanging on c7, so bishop takes c7, and you've got the hanging pawn. The second improvement, I think, is like all of this middle game stuff made sense to me. I don't want to spend too much time because I thought that all of this was pretty sound. c5 is an opportunity to cut off this rook from the game. From a positional perspective, understanding c5 is good. Now the only square that the rook can go to on the entire board is a6. Black's either going to have to spend time fixing the rook on c6, or he's going to have to come up with a different idea. But c5 trapping the rook on the c6 square is a good play. And then the one real, so that I would say is something to consider. That's a positional improvement. This b6 move here is a big error for, this ends up being a big error against white. So with b6 here, black is basically very close to winning this game. So yeah, that's the second improvement. Both of these were tactical things. One was just a one-move hanging pawn, and the other was, your opponent had a tactical opportunity that I think is worth, being able to see. So again, I'm going to go with my somewhat lazy answer and just say, more tactics. It is a quick answer. It's not a super, I'm happy to make it as detailed as you guys would like, but it is the correct answer. So, just do a ton of puzzles, and you'll see moves like b6 for your opponent. Luckily enough, your opponent didn't see b6, but b6 here would have been crushing for black. This really would have been a problem for, this really would have been a problem for white. Losing a full rook here is a huge issue. So, tactics puzzles, that's where to spend time. I wish I could give you something. I wish I could give you something more, specific. But I do really believe that's how you will improve the most quickly. That's the area of the game where you're playing games where things are getting decided tactically. So in order to get to the next level, you need to play with a lot of tactical accuracy. That should make sense. If the game's about tactics, then learn tactics. That's really what's going on here. So, anyways, very interesting. Thank you very much for sending it, DJ Salchicha. I appreciate it. And here, let's take a look at Paradox's game. Paradox is the last game of the session, and yeah, thank you very much for sending the game, DJ Salchicha. Those are two tactical and one somewhat positional improvements that I have. But the next step forward for you, I really think, is to just do tactics, and I don't know how much you play chess, but like take a little bit of the time that you're spending playing games of chess, and then switch them to your tactical study instead. E4, D5, C5. Nice. Okay, cool. We talked about this paradox, and this is the right move. C5 is best. Exactly right. Basically, if you play Scandinavian and your opponent overextends with E5, C5. Perfect. Glad you sent this game in, Paradox. Okay, yeah, no, for sure. And if you want to see it, DJ Salchicha, always feel free to watch video on demand. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, no, all the videos are on demand for 14 days on Twitch. And hopefully they should be up forever on YouTube, too. But 14 days on Twitch is probably the easiest way to access. So yeah, C5 is the... good. Yeah, good. Glad. Thanks for sending the game, DJ Salchicha, and feel free to send as many more as you'd like. It's played sometimes. It's yes. So I don't know if you're on the Discord, DJ Salchicha, but I have this section called chess resources. It's called like it's a channel on the Discord, and it's called recommended chess resources. And I've got a few different tactics trainers that I think will all be super helpful for you. I think I'm gonna add to that list. I'm gonna look into it in the next couple days. Lichess's tactics trainers, but whatever tactics trainer you like, just do that for like an hour or two a day for a month, and it'll really help. Like you know, um, the games are decided by tactics so frequently that it's the best path forward in terms of your time spent studying. Yeah, I'm sure that works. I don't know that one to be honest, but I'm gonna try to figure it out this week. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game lead chess or DJ Salchicha, and yeah, spend the time on the lead chess tactics trainers if that's your preferred one. All the tactics trainers are basically, you know, testing the same material. So I think if you spend an hour or two a day on that for a month, you'll be a lot stronger. I think it'll really really help. But yeah, please, do it and get back to me. But yeah, I think if you do a tactics trainer, the percentage of the time that you miss a move like b6 threatening the rook and queen is going to go down. Like you're going to see that much more frequently, and then you just won't play the rook up. That's good, but I mean, keep going. I don't know the rating systems for these things, but just keep at it is my main point. If however much you do it now, do it more, and I think that's your best path forward. The games are decided by tactics, like, way more than half of the time. So, depending on what level you're at. But yeah, I think that's where you would do the best in terms of improving. It might take a while, it might take a month or two, but like if you just do it for an hour or two a day for a month, there's no doubt in my mind you'd improve. It's the thing about it is I think people always kind of overlook it as a possibility, but make sure that you keep at that, because that's your most efficient route forward. But the thing is, I can't do, it's like homework you have to do. It's not really something that a teacher can help you with. It's just about putting the time in on your own. So anyways, on this last game from X Paradox, on e5, c5 is the best. Yeah, I mean, we all need to improve all parts of our games, otherwise we'd be grandmasters. But I think tactics, really put the time in on the tactics trainer, DJ Salchicha. I think that's really going to be the place where you will get the best return on your study time. But I mean, I'm happy to go through openings too. If you send me an opening that you'd like to look at, we can definitely add it to the stream and look it over. But yeah, that's my recommendation. That's your path forward. I think that's your best path forward. So yeah. Hey, what's up? What's up, Yi? How are you? How's it going? Yep, I think that's the right idea. But yeah, so anyways, in this game, c5 is the best response to e5, and here you've ended up. Sure, I mean, don't be too hard on yourself, but like, yeah, feel free to send over whatever you like, and I'll take a look at it, and we can go over and see if there's improvements. But yeah, knight c6, c4. d4. This all makes sense. Basically, with this, this e-pawn is getting weaker and weaker. So like, the reason why I say c5 against the reason why I say c5 against d4 is basically because one of the things, if you read Ideas Behind the Chess Openings by Fine, which is another one of my recommended books, they talk about one of the main components of the French opening being this d4 e5 pawn structure. And the point of this d4 e5 pawn structure is, if white can maintain d4 and e5 for the whole game in the French, white maintains the advantage. If white doesn't, then if white doesn't maintain that advantage or maintain that pawn center, then black will equalize or have a better position. So c5 basically prevents white from ever establishing this favorable French pawn structure, and I think that's white's best route in this opening when e5 has been played. Like e5 is very extended, so if white can't transpose it into the French, it's going to end up overextended on e5. So c5 I think is a strong play. Knight c6, c4, and then d4 I like a lot. I think d4 is basically a way to isolate this e5 pawn. With this pawn isolated on e5, you can play queen to c7, you can play g6, bishop g7, but one thing about the pawn on e5 is it can never be defended by its most natural defender, which is the d pawn. So d4 I like. It both gets more center control, gets more space for black, and makes this e pawn very difficult for white to defend. So good move, d4. Yeah, I think this all sort of makes sense. Here you have a good tactic. And this is another one, just the importance of tactics training. Just the percentage of games that are decided by tactics is so high. Like you really just need to, try to capitalize on these types of opportunities when they happen. But if you play queen to c7 here, this bishop is both getting attacked and it can't move. It's pinned to this queen. So no matter what, you're going to win the bishop or the queen on the next move. If the bishop moves, you take the queen. If anything else happens, you take the bishop. So this is actually a really big, this is a big deal. White has played this overly aggressive queen takes a7 move, and with queen to c7, you can win either the bishop or the queen. And a piece up should be enough to give you pretty good chances to win the game. So this is another one where I would just say, with enough tactics training, queen c7 should become like second nature. Like you'll see that, automatically, and it's and this threat automatically. So that's my piece of advice on that. Just basically maintaining this attack on the queen is, using this pin in your attack is a great tactic. It was still there. You did it the next move, so perfect. So you saw it the next move, but I would say, this should be pretty much automatic. But you do see it. So great tactic here. This is the right tactic, X Paradox. Thank you very much for, thanks for sending the game. This is like total, this is a strong tactic, the right idea. Queen takes, rook takes. I think basically, I don't know, black's in good shape. Black won a piece. See if it ever gets more, I don't know if it ever gets more competitive, but this all makes sense. Yeah, cool. All right, overall, good game, X Paradox. I bet you got a pretty high accuracy score on this one. That's actually lower than I would think, but it was an accurate game. My one suggestion, so this opening is correct. This opening really demonstrates how displaced this pawn can be on e5. c5 forces that e5 pawn to be displaced. And then d4 makes more sense. Makes sense. It means that d4 can never be played, and you win the pawn. Here, maybe I would not play knight takes. I think I would play here. Interesting. The engine says it's best. All right. I wouldn't have played knight takes e5 here. I would have played queen c7 and held off on winning this. But I guess bishop to f4 defends the pawn, so I don't know. I guess knight takes e5 is the best move. It's not what I would have played, but the engine says it's the best, so sure it's the best. The advantage of knight takes e5 is it trades off this center pawn for this b7 pawn. The b7 pawn wasn't really doing too much, so it doesn't really matter. And then you get the piece. Nice. This this wins a bishop or a queen for black, and after that, black is in very good shape. And then you very solidly hold on to the advantage for the rest of the game. Nothing too exciting here because you're just basically, converting a position up a piece, and that's good. A good conversion of a winning game. And yeah, honestly, everything here was pretty intuitive. I didn't really see any errors or problems. Just seemed like a generally good, well-played game by black. C5 though, I'm really happy to see C5 because I know we were, because I know you play the Scandinavian and I know you were seeing E5, and C5 is a big improvement than on your opening theory. C5, and I think you're more than equalized as black on move 2, which is really, a big deal, big picture. That will be very helpful to be equalized as black on move 2. If you can get a situation where that's happened, that's good for black. D4 made a lot of sense. D4 really prevented, basically it separated this pawn and this pawn, which was really important. It means that this pawn can never defend the E pawn. Like, now this is not going to ever be an effective way for white to defend that. So, good idea. Yeah, overall here, I think you played a pretty good game. I mean, after queen takes A7, queen C7, I think queen C7 you should see automatically. So I think with enough tactics training, you saw the tactic the next move, which was great. This is the right tactic to see. But you just want these types of tactical maneuvers to be just as automatic as possible. Like you want to be able to look at this position and like instantly see and not even consider any other moves. Look at, be careful so you don't hang pieces or that kind of thing. But like this should be a move that you want to be as automatic as possible in terms of your pattern recognition, because it's a winning move. Unfortunately, if you play knight f6 and white plays bishop f3, then that idea sort of disappears, and white's back to a playable game. Whereas if you play queen c7 here, white's pretty much dead lost, and you win. So yeah, a number of games today where I'm sort of leaning towards just, tactics training being the solution. I think there was a good positional move in this one where basically I liked the way that you... So first, I really like c5. c5 is the correct way to play against that e5 Scandinavian. Second idea, on d4, basically playing the d4 move as black, separating the e pawn from its most natural defender, was really a good move. Good idea, good thinking. And you ended up winning that e5 pawn. You played knight takes e5 like 3 or 4 moves later, and that was really correct. But yeah, I mean, that's my thinking on that. The biggest improvement that you can make, and it's something completely within your control, is just spending more time on tactics. There's a reason why my the moat that I have up at the moment is tactics, yeah, I think that's the best route forward for, almost everybody under 2,000 is just, do training very heavily focused on tactics. It decides such a high percentage of the games that you're going to be playing that, it's where you need to spend time. It's like, if something's responsible for 75% of the decisions in your games, it's only reasonable that you would spend at least 75% of your study time on that component. You could even go higher than that at your level. But there's a time at which you can circle back and study things that are other than tactics. But I am just really, really hard on tactical study for until you're about 2,000. Then you can make whatever decisions and you can branch out and but it's just such a high percentage of games are decided in that way that it's really I think it's really the most efficient path forward. Anyways, thank you all very much for sending games. The next stream is at 6:05 p.m. tonight. This will be the last stream at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. My schedule has changed. I'm taking different classes now than I was a couple months ago. So yeah, please feel free. Please stop by. And the next stream is at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you all very much for sending games, and keep up the tactical study. I think that's the best way to go. Anyways, thanks a lot. Thanks for sending the games, and I will hopefully see you tonight. Thanks a lot. Bye.